Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for Puberty, What Happens to Boys and How to Talk About It. I am Stacy Walker, the Education and Program Coordinator at New Canaan Cares. As I mentioned, this program will be recorded. You can also use the chat function to send questions if you have any. They will go directly to me and I will share them with Dr. Flynn. This evening, we have New Canaan's very own Dr. Bill Flynn from New Canaan Pediatrics. For those that live in New Canaan, Bill is a South School kindergarten graduate. He attended St. A's for Grammar School and graduated from Fairfield Prep. He received a Bachelor of Science from the University of Notre Dame and his Doctor of Medicine from Georgetown School of Medicine. Prior to joining New Canaan Pediatrics in 1994, he was a United States Naval Flight Surgeon, Chief Resident of Pediatrics at Yale University of Medicine, and an attending physician at the U.S. Saudi Arabia Teaching Project in Saudi Arabia. Welcome, Dr. Flynn.
Thank you. All right, so I understand that New Canaan Cares has been doing this for 20 years, but this is my first one. So I certainly will appreciate any feedback you can give me when we're done. They asked me to give kind of an overview of puberty in boys for the parents in town. And so, it's actually a really fun topic. There's lots of amazing stuff going on in our boys and our girls, but we're doing boys tonight. So I thought it would be fun to do. And just in general, you know, what I'd like to do is talk initially about the physical stuff in boys, and puberty is technically the change that goes on between two boys, between their childhood and then their full sexual maturation. And that's a limited thing, but we often talk about adolescence in boys, and that's a slightly broader topic that involves some of the social stuff and the psychological stuff and other things. So what I was going to do is start off talking initially about the physical things, the physical changes that boys go through, their growth and all the things that are involved in that. And then at the end, just touch on some more adolescent topics, general stuff about boys as teenagers and boys in our world right now. You know, I guess we'll try doing some questions as we go, but we'll just see how it goes. So the physical changes in puberty in boys. Now puberty, so there's a range of normal for everything in people, and in boys, the start of puberty has a large range. Normally, it starts somewhere between 9 and 13 normally. But the average boy is about 11 and a half at the very start of puberty. But with your boys, you're going to see, and I'm sure some of you have older boys, some of you have boys going through it right now, and some of you may have boys, you're just getting ready for it. But the start of puberty in boys is a pretty quiet thing to the world. So our daughters, the start of puberty in girls for our daughters is usually pretty obvious, because breast development, breast buds are the first thing that you notice. And that's pretty clear to everybody. But for boys, it's a relatively small change in the size of their testicles that determine the onset, or that identify the onset of puberty in boys. And so the boys don't usually know when it starts, and Lord knows their parents don't usually know when it starts. But, you know, when you go to the doctor, that's one of the things that we usually do. We usually give a glance to their genitalia and try to identify, hey, has this guy started puberty? And it's just that, it's the size of their testicles. So that's the start. And then there, you know, for doctors, we talk about 5 different stages of puberty. And I think actually, let's see, I'm looking at the slides here. Is it possible to go to the fourth slide?
Of course.
Is that the fourth there? The next one.
You want the next one?
The next one, yeah. So this is a schematic of the changes in boys' physical development over the course of puberty, and on the far left is no puberty, right? Nothing started. This is boys basically from birth till puberty starts, again around age 11 and a half. And then you have
Let her hold it. Shut that off and let her hold it.
For 1 minute. No, wait, can you just turn it off?
I thought that was a question, but so you see that range, and basically stage 1 to stage 5 is puberty in boys, right? That involves the entire time frame that we're talking about, and you see that on the far left, pre-puberty, you have very small genitalia but very small testicles, and then they grow, and then again, these are important. These stages are important to doctors. Parents don't usually know much about them, but we follow them mostly because it gives us landmarks for where the boys are, and it helps us identify if there are any problems in their development, in their growth, by identifying, what we see in terms of their physical exam. Now up to the second slide, if you will, Stacy. Good. So this is a growth curve, and it really is not. I don't find it probably very helpful for anybody, but because it looks like they just start growing and they just keep growing. But there's some subtle things in here that indicate the growth in boys in their pubertal stages. So if you look at here at 11 years of age, this curve gets a little steeper. But the next graph, the next slide, Stacy, is a little more dramatic. So it's more helpful. And this is a graph of the growth velocity. So how many inches a year are these guys growing? And before puberty, they're growing. They're growing somewhere around 2.5 inches a year. But then when puberty starts right in here, here's age 10, 11, you see their growth velocity picks up quite a bit. And then it peaks, and then it drops off. And right around age 17, 95 to 99% of boys are done growing at right around age 17. So this is more dramatic, and this is probably more in tune with what you see. All of a sudden, oh, he's shooting up, and he's looking like a young man. And if you look at the ages to expect this is a little busy because it incorporates boys who are early starters in puberty, average starters in puberty, and late starters in puberty. And so the curves early on at a younger age are high for the early boys. The average boys are right here in the middle, and then the late bloomers, if you will. So the other interesting thing I find in my practice between boys and girls for parents, especially when they have one of each, is that pretty much from the minute you know that your daughter started puberty, because you see the breast buds, they have their rapid growth starting there. And their rapid growth continues until they get their period, and then it slows down. And in boys, like I said, the start of it is usually unknown to everybody. And then they grow, and there's no marker like getting your period for boys, for people to know where they are towards the end of puberty. So it's not as clear in young men as it is, for our boys as it is for our girls. Now there's the next slide I find as a pediatrician more fascinating. It's basically the exact same thing. When you look here, here's the 11 and a half, the boys start shooting up, and then they trail off to 17. But for a pediatrician, to me, the more fascinating thing is that if you look over here, this rapid growth in puberty is blown away by the little boys back here between 1 and 2 years old, who at 2 start decelerating from way above what they're going to be when they're 13, 14 years old. That's how fast they grow at that age. It's just tremendous, amazing. And then it comes down here to the school age boys who don't grow much at all, and it slows down and then it picks up. So it's a really neat thing about a child's lifespan, is that they grow so much when they're tiny. And so that's probably a good time to switch to the growth topic, if we will. Yeah, so we can do that now. So it's about every day, about 5 times a day, you get asked the question, how tall is he going to be? How tall is she going to be? Honest answer, you don't know, but our best guesses are based on a bunch of different things. So the most probably accurate and insightful one, helpful one, is what's called the mid-parental height. And so you'll take, it's a simple calculation. You take mom and dad's height in inches, put them together and average them. And then for your boys, you add 2.5 inches. And for your girls, you take away 2.5 inches. And that's a really good indicator of what an average child, an average boy for a husband and wife at a certain height are going to be. It doesn't mean that's what your son's going to be, but it gives you an idea what to expect if a 5'4" gal marries has a child with a 5'10" guy, kind of thing. But spoiler alert, there's 2 to 4 inches on either side of that number where your son's probably going to add up. It's just a good indicator, but it's a number to give your sons. It's very likely that most of your sons are going to be within 1 or 2 inches of that number. And that's basically what pediatricians do when they try to guess how tall somebody's going to be, until they assess where they are in puberty. Another fun indicator of a boy or girl's height is doubling their height when they're 2 years old. And if any of you have 2-year-olds running around, it's hard to imagine that little guy is half of his adult height, because he's this little squirt in diapers. But he is. So a lot of those little 2-year-olds are 36 inches tall or 35 inches tall. Well, double it and you got a 6'5'10" guy. So it's crazy, but that's what it does. And then a lot of people come in asking to see if they can get a bone age on their child to see how tall usually he or she's going to be. And the bone age is a very real thing, and it's probably the single most accurate thing for guessing somebody's eventual adult height. I think, I don't know which slide that is, Stacy, not the picture, but there you go. No, the first one. So if you look at this is really from infants on down to older teenagers when they're fully grown right here. And so very high correlation between how old your bones say you are and what your height's going to be. It correlates with puberty better than almost anything. And so an example of this is the next slide, Stacy, with the picture. So here you see a 2-year-old's bones, and it's not that they don't have bone in here, they have cartilage in here. Those are their growth plate areas. And as they get older, they get more bone. And then finally, here's an adult where there is no cartilage, so there's no more growth plates. They're fully grown. So when we take a bone age on a child, it'll be read as 13 years old, and they have lots of information that says, I think a 13-year-old is around 78% of his adult height. So it's a simple math. However many inches he is, he's 78% of what he's going to be. And that's very accurate, especially as the older the kids get. But we don't do x-rays on children ever unless we have to. So this is not something I would suggest you go into your pediatrician and ask them to do, because I hope they say no. unless there's a problem, right? If there's a question of the growth, if there's a question of their puberty being normal, you know, then you go right to that and try to get some information. Now, you know, a person's height is overwhelmingly going to be a genetic factor. But you know, there is an influence of nutrition, and fortunately in our part of the world, there are very few people that have profound nutritional deficiencies, but in poor areas of the world, it does affect their growth. What more commonly affects our children are illnesses unidentified, conditions unidentified, that put a stress on their child's system or rob them of their nutrients. And then they may not grow as well as they could. So nutrition's important and everything, but it's still possible, despite the genetics and despite their nutrition, that they could have a problem. And you want to, and that's part of the reason that we pay attention to this stuff, is to identify those kids. And a lot of parents, and maybe not the ones who are listening to a talk on a Tuesday night, but a lot of parents very logically say, hey, you know, he's 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. There's nothing going on. He's not in puberty. He's already got his shots for kindergarten. He really doesn't need a checkup. But this is where those checkups are worth their weight in gold. Because if there is a problem, if there's early puberty, if there's a change in the velocity of his growth that doesn't make sense medically, then you start looking into it, and then you start trying to figure out what's going on. And it's always the earlier, the better. And while there have been some changes in medicine in the past 20 years, you know, by the time somebody starts puberty, you're really behind the power curve if there's something you need to fix. You know, the horse is out of the barn. So it's a good reason to keep up with those annual checks that, you know, quick glance, that's all they're doing, but it's very, very important to log that stuff year to year, to graph the kid out, to see where he's at, and to make sure that there's nothing that we should be looking into. Maybe at this point, Stacy, are there any questions that people have about the physical stuff of puberty?
So we have a question here, Dr. Flynn, and it's, as you're talking about the physical stuff of puberty, how do parents, caregivers talk to their boys about their bodies as they change when they come to their parents or caregivers with questions?
Wonderful. And again, I don't know where your boys are, and it goes for your girls too, but I'm always a proponent of trying to talk to them about this stuff before puberty, you know, before it gets emotional, before they're dealing with all this stuff. So the pre-pubertal boy or girl is really concrete. They're you know, they're yuck. Do I ever have to do that? Oh my God, no. And so establishing communication with them, trying to communicate to them that it's normative for a boy to talk to his dad or his mom about his body and his body parts, and if there's something wrong with them. You know, if you can convey that to them pre-puberty, then you've won. There's a much greater chance that they'll listen to you. But whatever time, trying to convey to them that it's just, it's a normal thing within the context of the home or within the context of your medical care, will help them immensely as they get older. I don't know if that answers that question.
It does. I'm just going to stop screen sharing. Is that okay, Dr. Flynn? Do you want the slides anymore?
Did I have any more? No, I don't
No,
think
good.
that's this.
I just, so before, as we go in and we start talking about the behavioral and emotional changes, it might be nice to have you on speaker view.
Very good. So it's interesting that certainly when you give one of these talks for our girls, there are all kinds of practical things that have to do with managing their hygiene and everything like that. And so there's tons of that. And with boys, there's not nearly as much of that, but there are two things that I think are worth mentioning, mostly to parents who have boys that are coming into puberty. But the one is the wearing of the athletic cups and protectors for the boys. And there's a culture in a lot of sports for boys not to wear a hard athletic cup to protect themselves during sports. And that I think is really bad. So I think it is a good idea for our sons, especially in the contact sports, to wear protection and to get in the habit of using it. Good news, catastrophic injuries to boys' testicles are relatively rare, but that makes it seem like it's not a big deal. And it is a big deal. And getting them in the habit of using something, and certainly when they're in contact sports, using a hard protective shield is a really smart thing to do. And I think, and I'm not certain of the information, but I remember hearing that the greatest number of injuries is in lacrosse, but the most serious injuries are in football. And by serious, it usually means rupture of a testicle and possibly loss of a testicle. So if there's anything we can do to prevent injury and loss of of one of the testicles, it's really, really helpful. And then the other thing, a practical thing for young boys, is that early on in puberty, for little boys, young boys, it really takes almost nothing for those boys to get an erection. And it is really concerning for the boys. And they don't know what to do about it early on. And if nobody's ever talked to them about it, it can be scary and frightening for them. The only real practical advice there I'd give you is that if those young boys if they can wear briefs, if they can wear things that hold them close to their body. So when they're wearing boxers and their genitalia is getting banged around in there, it doesn't take much. It almost takes nothing for some of those little boys to get an erection, and it's very bothersome to them. And then I had a funny story. And I never would have thought it would have happened this was a 14-year-old, but I get a call one morning as I'm starting in the office, and the nurses said, "It's an emergency, Mrs. So-and-so needs to speak to you." And this was many years ago, so they're long gone. So I get on the phone, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" And she said, "I'm driving my son, who was 14, to high school, and I'm sitting here outside of the school, and I can't let him go in because he's got a really large erection." And she said, "What do I do?" And I have no idea. I have no memory of what I told her to do. But I do remember telling her, if you do call him in sick, tell him that he had a consultation with the doctor, because you don't want to embarrass the poor boy. So it is a thing for a lot of young men, but for the really young boys, I think if you sense at all that they're having a problem, wearing briefs instead of boxers is about the only practical thing you can do. And then, are there any other? I don't know if there are any other physical changes of puberty that people want to.
Well, there's one more question here, Dr. Flynn.
Sure.
Could you talk a little bit about what we can expect as our boys? Oh wait, I had two. Sorry, they blended into one. If you talk a little bit about what we can expect as our boys go through puberty, mutiness. Oh, you said erection is a good one that you mentioned, voice cracking, etc. So those changes.
Sure. So, in terms of the way doctors understand a lot of those changes, they do try to group them into those 5 different categories. And things like the voice changes tends to be a later pubertal thing with the growth of the voice box under the influence of the hormones. Acne is another thing. Now, there are children that get acne before puberty because, that's another good topic for people, I guess, is that the hair development that we all get some of it can easily happen before puberty starts. So there are going to be some children who have some hair development, and it should get your attention, but usually the doctor can dismiss that that's a sign of early puberty, right? That's a problem, early puberty. Boys and girls can get hair development early that doesn't have to do with the start of puberty. And the same hormone that gives them the hair can also stimulate their glands to give them some acne, which can be disturbing if you have a 7, 8-year-old boy or girl with a little bit of acne. Like, oh my goodness, did I miss something as puberty started? But true adolescent acne doesn't usually happen until you're a little further along in true puberty for those skin changes. Interestingly, for puberty, the hormones I mentioned that can give you the hair development in 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th grade before puberty also is what can make those kids have body odor. So a lot of people get very concerned that their 3rd grader has terrible body odor all of a sudden, and that usually almost always is never puberty, nor an early sign that they're getting started early. It's a whole different system of hormones that are independent of puberty. But it is something to pay attention to. I mean, all the things you talk about are the things you pay attention to when you're trying to make sure that your child's growing normally.
And so in terms of facial hair, when could that start in children?
So for boys, the facial hair is a late thing. It's usually at the end of puberty that they get a regular full beard, right? Early on, you're going to get some lighter stuff, lighter growth, but to have that 5 o'clock shadow type hair is a late pubertal thing.
And then Dr. Flynn, so what age do wet dreams start, and what would be the best way to discuss them with your son?
It's interesting. I think most boys, and it's a good thing, know that they just happen, and they can start very early in puberty. Actually, I think the most helpful thing, honestly, for families in terms of the wet dream idea is, because almost every boy knows that that's something that happens, it also gives you an avenue to talk to them about masturbation, because that can be a euphemism for masturbation in a child. So, if you need to start talking about that stuff, that's a nice segue into talking to them, because it's a commonly known thing and almost universally accepted as a fact for boys.
Thank you. And I have one more question here about, are there concerns with the doctor missing observing stages, given that they only see patients once a year?
Generally, that's totally fine, because the time frame of these changes, usually captures anything that's aberrant, wrong. And then I also think that most parents are aware of the things that are going on, and half of the time when there's somebody who has an issue, it's the parent. It's not found at the well check, but it's a parent that brings their son in or their daughter in and says, what's this going on here? So we don't find that checking them more frequently. The only patients over the years that I think really benefit from that is if you have a strong family history of an abnormality, especially in early puberty, then you alert, the parents usually alert you to that, and then you talk about it, and any questions, you get them in sooner.
Great, thank you. And circling back once more to the wet dreams, Dr. Flynn, there's a question about what exactly do you say? Can you help some parents with some words or sentence starters, how to discuss it and bring it up?
Well, I mean, the thing I find most helpful in puberty talks for individual children, whether it's a boy or girl, is pointing out that every single man, or if it's a girl, woman in the world has the exact same thing. That it's so normal that if you can think of a guy, he's had whatever the issue is you're talking about. Their father, their brother, all these trusted people have gone through the same thing they've gone through. And then specifically when you're talking about that, just that it's a normal part of what happens to every boy. It's a good thing. I mean, just all these things are good things. They're healthy. That means that their body is normal, that they are normal, that everything's doing just what it's supposed to do.
Great, thank you.
Good. So then the kind of an adolescent thing for your boys that I think just topics that I think are helpful to keep in mind as you're starting to shepherd them through their adolescence are, just kind of the usual the habits of life, but specifically, one of them is exercise. And we live in a very sports-centric culture right now, but not every boy is into sports. And even the boys that are into sports, I think there's an angle on them that you want to consider. So the win for us in the long run for raising our boys is, we hope that they can cultivate a love of exercise in any form. And so for the boys that are into theater and music and robotics and all these wonderful things, it's still good for them to get exercise. And it's still a benefit for us to try to help them find something that will get them that physical activity. And it doesn't have to be, organized, and you don't have to have a whistle and scores for people to get exercise. So trying to help them early on find something that they enjoy doing. Doesn't have to be competitive, but gets them that physical exercise that hopefully they can carry on into their, adult life is a blessing. And it's something that you can contribute to by helping them find activities or things. And by emphasizing that they don't have to be, captain of the this and of that. And in the weight room 2 hours a day to get the exercise they need to be a healthy boy, healthy adult. And then the boys that are into sports, there's some sports that aren't going to carry on all their life. The stereotype is of the guy who plays football through high school, and then he stops exercising altogether and gains 100 pounds and is an unhealthy adult. So again, those boys, if you can, some of them are going to exercise despite what you do forever, but others may, benefit from trying to find something athletic, something that gets them the physical exercise as they get older. And then certainly their diet. The only thing I'd say about their diet is I think a lot of the dietary habits that kids get, they get younger than adolescents, but still, I think there's huge benefit from parents still talking about it, because they're not going to change what they eat when they're in college with their friends. They're not going to change any of that. But when they're 23 and they have their first job and they're off on their own, they're very likely to say, now, what did mom say about, oh yeah, I need some vegetables, I need a fruit, I need this, that's, so that's the win for us, is the long game on all these topics, that you get them through healthy, but there's no harm in still talking to them about what's the right way to eat and what a good diet is. They hear you, even if they don't do it. And then the other habit that is huge, and I apologize to any parents who are my patients because they've heard this all before, but sleep is a monster huge element for children, adults, but really, really for adolescents. And our young teens, young guys should probably get 9 to 10 hours sleep at night, and then our high school guys should probably get 8 to 9 hours sleep every night. And the majority aren't doing that. And it's interesting to me, I think, it seems like they're mostly mothers here, so you'll remember, but when our kids are tiny, you are zoned into their sleep, right? If they don't have their nap, you're gonna have a terrible afternoon. If they don't get a good night's sleep or they don't get to sleep on time, the next day is gonna be a mess. You're totally in tune with the child's sleep habits and how it affects their behavior. And then as the kids get older, we lose that touch with how much sleep they're getting, and we don't relate it to their behavior. And when they're teenagers, the door's closed, they're upstairs, and you don't know when they're sleeping or what's going on. But they're grumpy messes half the time. What got into him? He's a bear today. What's she doing? And I promise you that it's not all just a hormone black box. A lot of those days when he's grumpy or she's grumpy, it's because they haven't gotten a good night's sleep. And we lose track of that. But it's super important for them to keep doing it. And one technology that I recommend to parents, and except for the kids that might get too into it, but if they have a Fitbit or an Apple Watch in the house, they have sleep programs in them. And if you want to get a snapshot of how much sleep he's getting, have him wear it for a week. And that'll tell you, when he fell asleep, when he got up, how many hours he got, all that kind of stuff. So it's a quick little sleep study, but it can help you if they'll participate and wear it for you. So let's see, any questions on those things?
Not on that, but let's just circle back to one more question. When we were talking about erections, masturbation. We have a question here. What age do you recommend parents start talking to their boys about sex, masturbation, erections, wet dreams? If you can give us an age target range, I think that would be helpful for parents.
Yeah, again, not specific things about masturbation and all that stuff, but talking to them about the general topics before puberty starts, and then all of those topics once puberty starts, specific things.
Given though, Dr. Flynn, given that puberty can start at different ages for different boys, do you have a general rule of thumb of age that you start talking about it? I know, I keep circling back.
No, it's a valid point. But yeah, I mean, around age 10, age 11 is a good time, I think, to do that. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
And then let's see. So, and then I guess the final kind of broad general topic, but it's really, really, I think, important to think of it, especially for those parents whose kids are just entering those ages. The parents with older kids will already be dealing with it, but the whole technology thing is probably one of the more important things for parents to try to wrap their heads around and if they can get under control. The kind of dovetailing in with the sleep discussion, I very firmly feel that parents, whenever, at whatever point in your child's life they start with a cell phone, that it never be in their bedroom. Ideally never in their bedroom, but absolutely never in their bedroom at night. It's a recipe for disaster. And I've had plenty of parents with a 12-year-old say, oh, he's an innocent. Yeah, it doesn't have a hair on his body. He's fine. And that's true. It's sitting over there. But try to take that same phone away from him when he's 15 and you're sunk. That's World War III. So, if you can early on in, their teenage years, set down guidelines for their technology, it will save you a lot of heartache and save them a lot of problems later on. But the number of kids who have cell phones in their room every night is very troubling. And there's so much going on in so many of those rooms that nobody knows anything about. And it starts when they're young. So, the whole issue, and for boys, I think this is an incredibly important thing for parents to at least think about, but and it's beyond the scope of this talk to address, but the whole issue of pornography. So those little cell phones that those guys have access to unlimited amounts of pornography. And the average age for a child to be exposed to this stuff is in the 11, 12-year-old age group. And the majority of those kids have their first experience in their home. So on some technology in their home. And it can be really terribly damaging to these young kids to see that stuff. Over the years, I've had a handful of parents bring in their 12, 13-year-old boys because they were addicted to pornography. They found them with it, they told them not to do it, but they just couldn't stop doing it. And it was really devastating to the parents, but more to that little boy. So that, that's what those cell phones bring. They bring the entire world into your child's room or into their presence, but certainly in their room alone. And they don't have the ability to filter out that stuff cognitively and to understand it at all. And the danger to our boys from that pornography is vast. It develops a violence and an attitude towards women that's unhealthy. It very often interferes with their ability to have healthy, intimate relationships as they get older. As a father of daughters, you hear these stories of these terrible violations of young women, and you think of the victim, the girl. But if you're a parent of one of those boys, before that happened, they were an innocent whatever-year-old. And how did he get his ideas that this was okay or is even something to do? And a very, very high percentage of boys, men that are involved in date violence, date abuse, a much higher percentage of those guys that are involved in those type of violent things have exposure to pornography than in the general population. So it has a real detrimental effect. And these phones are the first place that many of them get exposed to them. So I really would be to your advantage to try to set up firm rules. And if they're 16, I'd still say fight the fight and try to get it out of there. But it's something that they can't control for the most part. And again, my point to parents is that, at 12, they're one thing, but at 17, they're different. And you'll help them a lot if you try to set up firm boundaries for a lot of this stuff in their life. And that's another point too, is that in the past couple of years, I've had a handful of patients who have been very harmed because they have been approached by pedophiles online in their multiplayer games. And these are incredibly sophisticated people who work their way into your little child's game, and it's really damaging what those people do to them. Those people are very sick. But if your boys are going to have access, especially the younger boys, to online multiplayer games, I think it's our responsibility to really monitor those things very closely. And put up with the pushback you get from them, because the damage that can be done is really, really severe and hard to understand. A lot of bad
Thank you for that insight.
It's real, and if you don't think about it or know about it, you can just start marching on through these years, and hopefully avoid it, but it may come to your door.
I know I've been reading about that more and more with different sites and stuff. So thank you for that wisdom. I think as parents and caregivers, that's stuff that we really need to be knowledgeable about. So Dr. Flynn, we have about 10 minutes left. We have two more questions here. And then maybe you can touch on a little bit more just emotions and what parents can expect, ups, downs, lows, highs, or what we might be seeing during puberty and maybe some behaviors that go with it. I have one question here about twins. What about twin boys who have different growth schedules? Would you discuss together with them or separately puberty and all the stuff that goes on? And then after that, if we can just touch on, I guess, the emotional and the behavioral changes, and to close it out, that would be great.
Sure. So yeah, twin boys, they've got to do everything together. I would talk to them straight up together. They're going to be sharing everything with each other anyway. And yeah, if it's just in terms of the informative stuff and the talking to them about stuff, that would be good. If they had individual issues or stuff, I would treat them as individuals. but just in terms of general knowledge and talking to them, I think it's really smart to treat those guys the same.
Super, thank you. Okay, now all the behavior things that we need to look out for, power shifts, moodiness, ups, down, all around, whatever you can give us.
Yeah. It seems to me that when you're going through puberty with boys and girls, it's just so individual in terms of their personalities and who they are. So it's really hard to draw any broad brush conclusions about that stuff. But if you're anticipating it, just trying to, keep an even keel and respond to them supportively, but in an understanding way, and to a certain extent you have to put up with it, the ups and the downs, but you're their rock, I've always thought, for all the moms here, I always thought that the single most important thing you can do for a teenage boy is for his mother to think he's the bee's knees, for his mother to think that he's the greatest catch in the world, for his mother to think that he's wonderful. Because if he's got that, he can, it's much more likely he's going to head out into the world with a positive self-image. If he doesn't have that, it's a lot harder. And I'm sure that's hard on many days to try to let them know that and think that, but in the big picture, it's a good thing. So I don't know if there's any more specific, I don't think I touched on emotional stuff, but is there a more specific emotional or mood?
Well, I think understanding everyone behaves differently in their, emotions are different at different stages and different ages. But I guess if you could just give a general overview of what emotions you may have seen or behaviors you have may seen in, boys during puberty.
I guess the things that strike me the hardest or the strongest are honestly when boys are rough and difficult with their mother, and having a parenting understanding between husband and wife that that you're going to support each other, because some of the more difficult things I've seen are boys that are rough and difficult with their mothers, and from the get-go, before they start maturing and getting more aggressive and more man-like, that they understand that it dovetails into how they treat women as well. I mean, I think they should be told, specific things about how are they going to know, but that because the media tells them all kinds of things, and all kinds of things come across to them, but that it's inappropriate to talk to your peer girlfriends about these certain things. It's inappropriate to say these things. They need to hear that kind of stuff from you. But the parenting thing's crucial, that you get support. A wife gets the support from their husband, that the son is not going to have any negative behaviors directed at his mother or his sisters or anyone else for that matter.
Great. Yes, thank you. That was such a great answer, especially being a mom of a boy too.
And it took me a while to figure out all the girl stuff. I'm one of 8 boys, and I had one sister, and she was on the other end of the list. So, but then I had 3 daughters, and it took me a very long time to figure out all the girl stuff, but it's been a blessing.
Well, I don't see any more questions here, Dr. Flynn. So as we're at about 7:26 or 27, I like to be timely. What can you send us off with? Any great big piece of advice for our boys as they grow into young men?
Advice for them, no, but I mean, advice for us is it sounds trite, but really to talk to them about this stuff, to just get all this stuff out there, so they think it's normal, that their mom and dad can help them with these things as they go through them, and hopefully you get them early enough that sinks in, and then if they ever need you, you will have given them permission to talk to you about that stuff, because you spoke to them first about it, so they have permission to approach you about those things. And we see kids in the medical office in times of crisis when things happen, and those always go a whole lot better when the kids feel comfortable talking to their parents about stuff.
I think that is a wonderful piece of advice to end with, Dr. Flynn. I can't thank you enough for joining us this evening. And thank you to everyone else who joined us this evening for this talk with one of New Canaan's favorites, Dr. Flynn.
All right, thank you.
Thank you all. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.